Nomiki show. Clash momentarily for class solidarity. Cash circulating, give the masses back its currency. Greed from elites, oligarchs stay fed. Deep state, fake fed, everybody break bread. Racism, homophobia, sexism, religion in this melting pot we live in. Time to build a new system, unionize labor rights. Highlight the issue, talking heads left is best. The saga continues. The Nomiki Show.
Hello and welcome to the Nomiki Show. We have a special Femme Friday today. It is Friday, May 13th. Friday the 13th, which in my culture is actually good luck. And I think in a lot of other cultures around the world outside of the US is good luck. So let's take that in because we need it right now. I'm going to start calling this show the Existential Crisis Show because the news is just really depressing. We have a special show today. We are going to be talking about the climate. We are talking about just how oil companies have really taken hold of the fight against climate change, knowingly taken hold, and some of the shenanigans that they've been doing over the, decades since they've known that climate change does exist, and what they've been doing to basically prevent us from taking any action. We will be right back after this quick break. We're going to be talking with Amy Westervelt. I got to talk to you beforehand a little bit about Sunset Lake CBD. I know you guys love Sunset Lake CBD because I get messages from people about Sunset Lake CBD. I just got a new order. I'm so excited because there's a new gummy out, one that has melatonin in CBD, like that tincture I use at night. I just can't eat like 6 of them at once. Like last night, I had 2 glasses of wine and then I popped a gummy and then another gummy and then I felt like a zombie. But it was great for sleep. Because I do have sleep issues. Sunset Lake CBD is, of course, a farmer-owned company that ships their craft CBD directly from their farm in Vermont to your door. They have all types of different products. They have tinctures, they have fudge, they have dog biscuits, they have, you can get a joint, of course, it's just CBD, no THC at all, which is great because if you just want to calm down or relax, without getting that high, this is the product for you. That is perfect for me too, because I can still focus. I can still, unwind from the news cycle and not feel the anxiety. There's also coffee with CBD in it, so you don't get jittery. It wakes you up, but you're not jittery. And the alternative to that is the melatonin with the CBD, which helps you go to sleep and stay asleep. I love the products. My family loves the products. I know many of you do. And if you are interested, go check out sunsetlakecbd.com and you will get 20% off of your order. When you type in NOMI, N-O-M-I, you will get 20% off of your entire order at sunsetlakecbd.com. Trust me, it ain't your typical CBD. I am telling you, it is the best. Go check it out. All right, we will be right back with Amy Westervelt. Welcome back to the Nomiki Show. Amy Westervelt is an investigative reporter, journalist, and host of the Drilled podcast and co-host of Hot Take and Scene On podcast. She's also the co-founder and executive producer of Critical Frequency, a podcast production company. And Amy, you are on the oil beat. Oh my gosh, what a depressing beat to be on. Can I just start with that?
It really is.
I'm reading your pieces and I'm like, great to read this after last week. It just makes me feel we're not in denial at all.
Yeah, it's bad news lately, I have to say. I there's not a lot of ways to spin it. Yeah.
Well, I'd love to leave people with hope. But I mean, the more people know, obviously, the more activated they get.
Yeah.
You have a couple pieces out in The Intercept in covering, oil production and how the IPCC, which is this governing body, and I'm going to ask you a bit about that in a second, really hasn't, doesn't have the teeth in the international community that we probably wish they would, and that has to do with industry involvement. So let's start with IPCC, because I think a lot of folks may have heard that for the first time when this report came out, basically saying, "Oh, we're doomed."
Yeah.
Like, enjoy your last days. What is the IPCC, and how did you touched on this in the piece, but how did they form?
Yeah, so the IPCC is this group of scientists and researchers from all over the world that was formed by the UN back in the 90s. So there was this kind of the first big international climate conference was in Rio in 1992. And at that conference, they created the UN Framework on Climate Change. And then out of that came this IPCC body that sort of, it's kind of this like oversight body for all of the climate research. And they put out these reports every 4 years-ish. Sometimes it's like shorter, sometimes it's longer, but around every 4 years. And what they're supposed to do is sort of summarize the state of the research. Here's what we know. And then also here's what we know about what we could do about it. And the big problem, in my opinion, about both the UNFCCC and the IPCC is that they've allowed industry in there from jump. There were industry folks in Rio in 92. There were industry folks helping to draft like the framing documents that all this stuff is based on. And still today, there are industry folks who are authors of this report. So
when you say industry folks, I think what my in the US, we have a lot of industry folks getting involved, but our campaign system is what makes them so powerful. We have,
right.
Our campaign finance system is a joke. You can lobby. So oftentimes you'll find sneaky ways for oil executives to get their, have their influence on our policies. But the UN doesn't accept that kind of money. And
Right.
I assume the IPCC doesn't either.
Right.
Neither does the EU. So how are they able to influence and get on these committees? And I'm going to add one more thing. If you could kind of just describe, I'm sure you're familiar with like how oil companies will often get involved in the research by funding it and going to different universities, et cetera, like how that may impact this report as well.
Yeah, that all plays a part. So, I mean, in this case with the IPCC and sort of the UN framing stuff, basically, as soon as countries first started to meet and talk about environmental issues internationally in general, so like before climate change, you have them all meeting in Stockholm in the early 70s, right? And this thing called the Stockholm Convention comes out of that. And it is the least business-friendly document these guys have ever seen. And they're just like, oh shit, we gotta get a hold of this process because we just sort of thought it would be who cares, but now we're realizing that these these international bodies might actually have some sway and some influence. And so heading into Rio in 92, in the lead up to that, they are meeting with various government representatives. The guy who ends up overseeing the Rio Earth Summit was actually a former oil executive from Canada. So he's very into the idea of business being part of the solution. And there's this particular guy, E. Bruce Harrison, who was a publicist for the chemical industry. He kind of was the guy tasked with dealing with Rachel Carson's book back in the 70s.
What's that?
Silent Spring. Yeah. So this guy who, has kind of been helping various industries deal with environmental regulations for a long time, he sort of sees all of this stuff coming and he helps to organize industry's response to it. And what he learned from the Rachel Carson incident is that just saying regulation is bad won't work. They sort of lost that battle, right? Like in the wake of Silent Spring, you have the passage of the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act and the formation of the EPA and all of that stuff. So he's like, okay, we can't do that. That's not going to work. What we need to do is present ourselves as part of the solution. And this is like the most toxic idea that gets into this whole process, because you still have so many people today who are very much convinced that, you have to have quote unquote, all stakeholders at the table and everybody needs to agree. And I don't know, I call it toxic civility. I just think it's like, look, people have like shown absolutely no evidence of ever negotiating in good faith on this stuff. And it's been 34 years. It's time to like get real and kick them out. So anyway, that's the problem, is that they've kind of been there since the beginning. They've really convinced a lot of people, including in the UNFCCC. I mean, Christiana Figueres is the head of the UNFCCC, and she invited just last year Shell's CEO to like the event that they had before the COP in Glasgow. So like,
I was there for that, weirdly enough.
It was amazing. Did you see
it was the protest?
Yeah, the activists
in the room.
You remember?
This is a TED conference for folks to know, weirdly enough. It was incredible and powerful, because you had a lot of climate activists, young climate activists, specifically the local climate activists, who are opposing a pipeline that Shell was drilling. They had the CEO on stage as well as Amazon CEOs, where we protested them. It was totally ridiculous. This is a climate summit.
Yeah, they have no place there. And I mean, there's been research, a lot of research in the last couple of years, including this paper that I wrote about for The Intercept, that shows very clearly that, industry saw the international negotiations particularly as a huge threat. So like, I think there's been a lot of focus in the past on what they were doing in the US, which yes, they were absolutely fighting against regulation, but the US guys were actually more worried about international policy because it wasn't as captured as US,
Yeah, because you don't have lobbying, because you can't, there's no money in politics. They actually do have a regulatory, and they're not afraid of regulation in the EU, for instance.
So yeah, I think, and I mean, there was a peer-reviewed study earlier this year that showed that none of the oil companies are doing anything to actually comply with their net zero bullshit. So the idea that like they need to be involved and they're an important part of the solution or whatever, no, that it's just not true. It's not backed up by any evidence, and we have decades of it.
Right. Well, and let's go back to that, because there's this question of over whether or not they're climate denial, they're in denial, or they're just basically delaying. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, I've got to say, I mean, I reported on sort of the origins of climate denial for a long time, and then I kind of came to this point where I was like, this doesn't make sense. Like that, this being the sole strategy doesn't make sense, because like, please point me to the time in U.S. history when we were remarkably science-based in our policymaking. Not a thing. So the more I looked at it, the more I was like, science denial was a piece of their strategy at a particular time. They figured out that would be helpful, but the bulk of their strategy has always been wrapping American identity up in big houses and big cars and freeways and consumption and all of these things that require more and more and more fossil fuels. And like, kind of in conjunction with that is massively taking over the study of economics. So you mentioned university funding before. Fossil fuel companies have funded many of the economists who've come up with the models that people point to today in order to say, oh, it's too expensive to act on climate change. They also have been very, very fundamental in pushing ideas about free market capitalism and how fundamental it is to American identity and to freedom and all of these things. There's a significant amount of documentation of what they were doing post World War II to make sure that, any kind of government intervention that was okay during the war is no longer okay, and to really foment the Cold War. So that stuff to me seems it's much more insidious, and it's not that they're now shifting their tactics away from denial and to delay. It was always delay, and denial was like a piece of that, but it was always, we need to stave off any kind of regulation as long as possible to make profit. Same old story, I think. And to do that, they really they took over economics. They took over a lot of like cultural politics and identity stuff that is very baked into how Americans now, or a lot of Americans now, see things. So it's like, I don't know, they did it so well and for so long that they don't even need to do it that much anymore. They just have to like push on those buttons, you know.
Right. Oh,
they're going to take your hamburgers. They're going to take your freedom, you know?
Exactly. It's bizarre. I mean, if you ever turn on, which I hope you don't, but if you ever turn on like Fox Business, they discuss climate change. It's very bizarre. They're acknowledging it. But then they, you know, it's conflicting. It's more from an economic perspective. But then you put on Fox News and it's like, you know, monster truck rallies and whatever the heck that they're discussing, like we're taking our way for our, you know, to save the polar bears. It's super interesting, the different conversations that they have on the different platforms. How do oil companies like greenwash? Just, I mean, I know this is a big space, but help us understand sort of their methodology and where we might even be tricked.
They right now are very focused on these like net zero promises that they've made, which don't mean anything. I mean, they're, in some cases, they're only looking at their own operational emissions, which is like 10% of the overall emissions that they're responsible for. So it's like, it's negligible. The big thing is just to invest in technologies that basically enable the status quo. So they're very invested in carbon capture right now, which so far has only been used for something called enhanced oil recovery, which is basically like you shoot carbon in the ground to get more oil out. It's not like a climate solution, you know? But that's their big play right now. They are also very invested in, you know, like algae-based biofuels. A lot of them are looking at hydrogen now because that is tied in with the gas industry, which they're all also invested in. So it's usually the things that they're investing in are things that do not require any kind of change to the combustion engine, because that would mean massive infrastructure change away from fossil fuels. Anything that can use existing pipeline infrastructure, grid infrastructure, they're very into. And anything that enables them to keep producing fossil fuels without stopping, which honestly, in this administration, they don't even need to bother.
So explain that, because now this big conversation about you know, not that we've been dependent on Russian oil, but the EU in particular, they've pulled away from gas, and now I believe Poland is the one country that's really blocking the EU from getting off of Russian oil. We of course are not dependent on Russian oil, but this, I heard Putin say yesterday, I heard Biden say yesterday that you know, the reasons why gas prices are up and inflation is up is because of Putin. And I'm like, no. Why can't you say the word CEO? Like, is there anything? They're allergic to this, but I'm not saying that war does not impact oil costs for lots of different reasons, especially if you're in Europe. But don't we control a lot of our own oil? Like this is such a bizarre space, because you see stuff on TV and then you read it in the news, and it's very different what's coming out of his mouth versus what you're reading in most newspapers.
Yeah. So this is actually really interesting because it gets to the sort of climate disinformation stuff too. As soon as Putin invaded Ukraine, and even like a couple of weeks before, the oil industry was immediately out there setting this narrative of, you know, this is why we need more US oil production, because now our gas prices are going to go up. And it's all the fault of Biden and the climate left. So they've really they've pivoted their messaging just in the last year from greenwashing and, you know, all of that stuff to now what you're seeing. There's some research coming out later this month that looked at what exactly they were messaging on social media and right-wing media during this time. And it's like full culture war. It's like climate policy is the, you know, realm of the woke left. Biden cares more about climate activists than he does about real Americans. And really pushing this narrative of, you know, the high prices at the pump are because of Biden's climate policies in particular. That was like a thing that they were just beating people over the head with. And none of it's true. And none of the things that the Biden administration is now doing to, totally in reaction to this messaging from the industry, not at all to do with like what would actually help. None of it would help. It's all long-term stuff. You don't build an LNG export terminal in a month. That takes years. Even they were to massively increase production in existing rigs and oil wells and use existing infrastructure to export more to the EU, that wouldn't have any impact on our gas prices, A, and B, like the reason it's irritating me because the whole reason that we're beholden to global forces when it comes to price at the pump is because the industry pushed to lift the export ban in 2015. So like because of the fracking boom and because those guys had too much gas stockpiled, they pushed for the administration to lift the export ban that had been in place since the 70s, which allowed them to engage in global markets, and it made all of us beholden to global commodity pricing. That's why prices are high at the pump. It has absolutely nothing to do with Russia, Ukraine, except that like the Russia-Ukraine stuff has spurred some volatility in the market. But it's totally decoupled from actual supply and demand. It has nothing to do with it. And I don't know why the Biden administration can't just say that, like.
It's really bizarre to me. I think, I completely agree with you because it doesn't hurt him. It actually just fights back against right-wing messaging. It's bizarre. But remind folks why we had this export ban.
So back in the 70s, there was a sort of similar situation, right? We had an oil crisis in the U.S. because of United States support of Israel in the Israel-Arab War. The Arab oil-producing countries in OPEC put an embargo on sending oil to the U.S. And so at that point, there actually was a supply issue. There genuinely wasn't enough oil in the country, and people were lining up around the block and being assigned certain days that they were allowed to get gas and all of these things. And so Nixon actually put in place a ban on exporting any oil. And that was, in place for 30 years, As soon as the fracking boom kind of started, the industry started lobbying the government to lift that ban. And Obama did that in 2015. And really a lot of everything that we're dealing with now is related to that, including, our total dependency on the fossil fuel industry. So
in terms of hydraulic fracking, what is the state of this movement? Not movement. I say movement from like an industry stance because it seems like the word is out and people, there's a sort of ban on fracking in New York State, other states, the EU. People start now seem to understand the science behind what's really happening versus say 10 years ago when it was unclear. Is oil and gas? Is there still much push for fracking, or is it like a dead industry? I guess is what I'm trying to say. Is it dying
right now? It's absolutely booming right now. Thanks to this announcement that Biden made in March with the EU saying, okay, we're going to supply a shitload of gas to Europe and we're going to lock in demand until 2030. That is the most ridiculous, the most ridiculous decision. It doesn't have anything to do with short-term need. It locks us into this. And so now, and then they had this like sham hearing where they hauled all the executives into Congress to yell at them about price gouging at the pump and then ended up begging them to produce more oil and gas. So, it's fucking game on for these guys right now. I just talked to someone who, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I just talked to someone who works in the Permian in Texas. That's like the big basin there. And she was like, I haven't seen this many new rigs going up this fast since like the early days of the fracking.
Oh my God.
It's really bad.
And they're doing this because, again, going back to geopolitics, this is because the EU is not going to rely on natural gas from Russia
Russia.
anymore. And so
That's right.
Biden is like, don't worry, we'll supply it across this
Mhm.
ginormous ocean.
Yeah.
Nothing bad could happen at all.
Yeah, exactly.
What?
Yeah. It's insane. It's insane. And it's like a fucking gift for the gas guy because, yeah, they had been really on the ropes. The fracking guys never actually made money off of fracking. It's like the biggest pyramid scheme ever. The only people who ever made money were early investors who made money off of late stage investors. That's it. They never had cash flow. Like they've been really, they thought lifting the export ban would help. Didn't really help.
It's like crypto.
Yeah, exactly. So then, recently when gas prices first started to go up, all the fracking guys were like, don't worry, we won't increase production because we want to actually be able to pay shareholders dividends that they've been waiting on for years. And we're going to do that instead of increasing production. That lasted for a few months. Now they're all like, okay, actually we have this demand locked until 2030, so we can go for it. The risk has been removed for us. And so they're all like, they're just, going at it really hard. And they again, because of not just the fact that they weren't making money, but also the folks had kind of figured out, oh, wait a minute, gas is not actually a bridge fuel. It's not actually clean energy. There's all these problems even before you get to the climate impact with water and radioactive waste and all of these things. And so states started to pass gas bans. Cities and counties were passing them. The states were passing them. It actually caught the industry off guard for a hot minute. And then they quickly moved to pass a bunch of preemptive bans on bans. So now those exist in 18, 19 states. And they have this great gift of this whole situation, be like, actually, you're not going to get rid of us because you need us. And we're going to grow, in fact. Yeah.
So this is interesting because I think, I like to break down where our consumption comes from, where, I remember years ago, I went, I was it was in Los Angeles interviewing a climate researcher, and she said to me, people think all the smog comes from the cars in Los Angeles, but like, yeah, okay, in the 60s before it was really regulated, it did affect it. But the majority of the smog was coming from the port and the ships at the port of entry right there that were coming in from China, from Asia, was actually creating the air quality conditions there.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, that to me was really fascinating. And then, that gets to the point of, well, is the pollution really coming from our car use? Of course, there's an effect, but or is it much bigger? Is it really coming from smokestacks and, ships coming in? And obviously every city is a little bit different. I know in New York City, they put a ban on a very long fight on this. There was a city council member, Kostas Anidis, he's not there anymore, but he had pushed for a ban on natural gas in housing.
Yeah.
And, even if you dealt with public housing, I believe 1 in 8 New Yorkers are in public housing, and retrofit it, then you would decrease pollution. That's the number one cause of pollution in New York City. Yeah. So in terms of consumption, whether it's oil or natural gas, where are we using? What are the major consumers, nationwide?
Yeah, this is super interesting too, because again, the industry tries to paint this picture of like, hey, we're just supplying a demand here. Like, you guys are the ones that are addicted to our product. It's not us pushing. But actually what the IPCC report found was that, in fact, this is a product looking for a market in a lot of ways. And that so right now, actually in the US, we have seen a massive decline in fossil fuel use in both buildings and transportation, which are historically major areas. The other one is industrial, which is, all the manufacturing, all of our other consumption, right? Which is not purely connected to energy. But as it started to go down in transportation and buildings, what the industry did was shift its attention to petrochemicals and plastic. So the reason that you're seeing a massive boom in single-use plastics is not because there's an increased demand for single-use plastics. It's because the oil industry needed a place to recoup the profits it was losing on transportation and buildings. This is why I'm kind of like, look, this idea that the markets are going to solve it, or that like, industry needs to be at the table to like draft regulation. It's just like, come on, it's not like they're going to ever, make the decision that's best for the rest of us. They operate, as all companies do, to generate profit. And like, that's what our laws are set up to enable. So I don't even necessarily blame them, but it's like, why do we keep expecting them to behave differently? They're going to keep looking for more. That's why I'm so worried about this gas build out, because like, as soon as demand drops, they're just going to find another way to push that stuff. It's not like they're going to take that signal and produce less. They don't operate that way.
Oh, don't worry. They're just gonna push more recycling. It'll all make up for it.
Yeah.
I'll be sipping on a metal straw from underneath the ocean because climate will have impacted. My apartment will be underwater by then.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Wow. Well, what a beat. I really give you a lot of credit for being on this beat. It's like depressing. Amy, really, really appreciate it. It's like being a COVID reporter at this point. Like, there's never any good news coming.
It's true. But yeah, I try to tell people to like feel sad if you need to. That's normal, but then like get mad, because it's really enraging. It's very unfair and unjust. And what these companies get away with is criminal. So people, anger's a more pleasant emotion sometimes.
And if it gives you any hope, a lot of these elected officials that are put in charge of this, they're a little old now. Their days may be done pretty soon. I'm not, because time to retire. They can't keep their thoughts together.
I can only hope
Amy Westervelt.
Joe Manchin chokes on some coal dust sometimes soon.
How old is he? I feel like he's not old enough yet, but
it's true. We can dream.
It is. It's amazing that the climate. He's basically their warrior, and he's really ending all days for us. Thanks.
Yeah, big time.
Amy, thank you so much for joining us. Amy Westervelt is an investigative journalist and host of the Drilled podcast and co-host of Hot Take and Scene On podcasts. You can go check out her pieces in The Intercept on the oil industry and pollution, all the things you really want to hear about right now. Very, very good having you on. And you make it so digestible also. So that's...
Oh, thank you. Thanks. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Amy.
The Nomiki Show.
All right, guys. Well, we had a very special show today, as you can tell. If you haven't already done so, make sure you've liked and subscribed us. Subscribe to us on all the different platforms. That includes Twitch. Go check us out on Twitch. That also includes YouTube, of course. YouTube, the world of algorithms that don't benefit anybody that's not a fascist, which we've talked about enough. And if you're not already following us on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, go check us out over there. All different things. On Facebook, it's just Nomiki Const. On Twitter, it's The Nomiki Show. On Instagram, it's The Nomiki Show. Go check us out there. And if you are not already a patron, that is what really makes this show happen. We are so grateful to our patrons. We have all different levels, starting at $5 a month. I used to call that a New York City iced coffee. My iced coffee is now $8.50. That is 2 years different. That's not inflation. That's New York City rents that causes the cost of a nice coffee to be that high. Actually, $5 iced coffee. I was in Arizona a few weeks ago visiting my family. It was even more, I think it was like $6 there, $6 or $7. So I know it's not all iced coffee. I get the notes from you guys, but it's the typical iced coffee. It's the cold brew. It's the stuff that really keeps me going. But we have all different levels, and we have swag. Go check out our swag. Go check us out at patreon.com/The Nomiki Show. And if you have it in your heart to sponsor another patron, please let us know, because some of our patrons have been hit by the economy and we try to work things out. If you are one of those patrons, email us at thenomikishow@gmail.com and we will figure it out. In the meantime, have a wonderful weekend. We will see you on Wednesday. And as always, stay in solidarity.
The Nomiki Show. The Nomiki Show. Yeah, Clash momentarily for class solidarity. Cash circulating, give the masses back its currency. Greed from elites, oligarchs stay fed. Deep state, fake fed, everybody break bread. Racism, homophobia, sexism, religion in this melting pot we live in. Time to build a new system, unionize labor rights. Highlight the issue, talking heads left is best. The saga continues. The Nomiki Show. The Nomiki Show. The Nomiki Show. The Nomiki Show.